Alright, we are back for William and Sly. Let's do this puzzle. I got a pen ready, I got a paper ready. Oh. Yellow. Purple. So now what? Good guy? Oh, thank you. That was really difficult. Okay. Alright, so now that we have octopus, and we have frog, I'm gonna need pearl. So I had found, while I was researching this game, that there is actually a prequel book that was written to go along with the story that if you wanted to, you can read. And I had contacted the developer who wrote the book, and he gave me full permission to do an audio reading of different parts of the book. Well, all of the book, but I will probably read parts of the book to you to give you a little bit of, I guess, background noise of me reading. If you want me to read the full book, I will probably read the full book for you, but for the sake of the game, I'm only going to read the book as much as my gameplay will allow me, if that makes sense. And if you yourself want to buy the book, it is available on Amazon. It's a pretty fun read. It's a light read, but it's fun. And also to note, this is not a sponsorship in any way. The most that has happened was that the developer was kind enough to give me a free key to play the game for the channel and for you guys. I found the book all on my own, and I started to read it, and I actually really enjoyed it, so I wanted to share it with you, but also while supporting the developer so that he gets credit for all of his hard work too. So anyway, here is a picture of the book that you can find on Amazon. If YouTube allows me, I will make sure to post a link to the Amazon page so that you can find the book for yourself. But yeah, anyway, here goes the reading. It may cut in and out as I find and solve the different pillars and whatnot. Alright, so the book is called Secret Places and Hidden Things. A boy wakes up in a mysterious castle with no memory except his name. The rooms are always changing and the time has lost all meaning. Reoccurring dreams hint at his forgotten past while he tries to navigate this strange new world. As more people appear and the castle begins to reveal its secrets, he starts to see behind the veil, wondering at the hidden mechanisms driving existence around him. A boy follows a fox into the woods and his world changes forever, past and future tangling into a convoluted web. He rediscovers his greatest friend but loses everything he's ever known, lost, wandering in a waking dream. When reality fractures and time turns back on itself, can they find a way to put the pieces back together, or is life just better this way? Secret Places and Hidden Things. Book 1, Hidden Things. Chapter 1. His name was Jack, but that was all he knew. Dark mountains loomed over him, golden at the edges, with evening sunlight. He peered at them for a moment, unfocused, before he realized he was inside, looking through a massive window and sitting in a very comfortable chair. He wondered how he arrived in such a pleasant situation, but decided not to question it. A small noise pulled him from his reverie. Another person was there, an old man, or perhaps a boy, probing him with icy blue eyes. "Who are you?" the man asked softly. Not really sure, Jack responded, trying to guess the man's age. He was almost colorless, with silver hair and a pale complexion, but his face was unlined and his eyes were bright. They looked through him vaguely as the sunlight refracted within, glowing like glacial ice. Not sure, not really sure, though. So maybe you remember your name? Jack, I think. Well, that's something, the man said. Can you remember anything else? Jack thought for a moment, then shook his head. Do you know who I am? He asked, only slightly curious. The man leaned back in his chair and surveyed him carefully. The room around them was deeply quiet. Spots of bright sunlight revealed fragments of reality, a carved armrest here, a bit of embroidery there, small truths floating in the dark. Hey, friendo, what's going on? It looks like a strong river flowed through here at one point. The rocks are very smooth. Of course, all of the rocks in this place are smooth. It never stops raining. Jack supposed the man must be searching his memory, but in the end, he just shook his head and looked down at his spidery fingers. Then, who are you? Jack asked. Me? Oh, well, let me think. I call myself Derek. Yes, that's it, I believe. That's an unusual name, isn't it? Jack said, grinning. This Derek felt like an old friend. Maybe he was. Yes, I suppose, but how would you know? Maybe you remember more than you think. He rubbed a long finger along his palm, looking at Jack. His eyes were empty. It isn't my real name, he said after a moment. No. Well, I'm not sure what that name was. I lost it a while ago, you see. Derek seemed fitting enough, so that's what I went with. He waved a hand airily. But how can you lose your name? Jack asked. Well, how indeed? Suppose a name is like anything else. If you don't keep track of it, it just disappears. Things do seem to disappear rather easily in this place. He drifted off, examining Jack's chair. Jack looked around the room. It was small and circular, made of some sort of black stone. The last brilliant ray of daylight made the polished wooden furniture shimmer faintly, their red cushions burning. The ceiling went on forever into the darkness, even above the peak of the window. He supposed things might get lost up there. What is this place, exactly? Jack asked. Or maybe, where is it? Derek didn't seem to notice Jack was talking to him. When he finally looked up, he leaned forward curiously, scanning Jack's face with his eyes. This place. Oh, yes, right. I call it the Helm, but that's not a name, is it? Well, it doesn't matter. As for where it is, I have no idea. He looked out the window again. Today it's in the mountains, looks like. Jack followed his gaze. Will it be different tomorrow? Maybe. Probably. You could walk out the door and end up anywhere, really. It's easy to get to this room, though. Yes, I usually come here when it's cold and make a nice fire. He looked at the empty wall across from the door. The fireplace seems to have disappeared, however. Jack looked at the wall, too. With the deep shadows gone, he could see the stones more clearly. Large and smooth, they fit together like puzzle pieces, some bigger than his whole body. How big is this helm? It must be enormous. He looked up at the endless ceiling again. Well, I suppose it is. Things don't really stay the same, though. Always moving and changing about like that. Derek wiggled his fingers. You'll be able to find a lot of rooms if you go looking for them, but some days I can only find the dining room and the library. Oh, are you hungry at all? Jack shook his head. Okay, I'll show you the dining room later then. They sat in silence and watched a maple leaf blowing against the window. Aside from the dull tapping, it was quiet. Is there anyone else here besides you? Jack asked. I'm not sure. I haven't seen anyone for quite a while, Derek said, waving his hand again. People appear and disappear. It's always news to me. Jack thought this was slightly alarming. It must have shown on his face. You won't disappear unless you want to, he said. He said mildly. Actually, in fact, if you plan to, it'd be nice to let me know beforehand. Most people don't, and I have to wonder where they went. Jack felt a sudden yawn, and he stretched wildly. Derek looked out the window. A few faint stars had appeared in the sky. The sun had finally dropped below the mountains. It's night all of a sudden. That's when people sleep. He tapped his nose knowledgeably. I can show you your room. Maybe, if it feels like showing up. He unfolded himself like a bit of limp string and rose to his feet. Jack followed him out the door. They walked in silence, moving down long, shadowy hallways. Jack tried to remember something, anything, about his past, but it all seemed far away. He felt new, somehow, as if he hadn't existed before that evening. It might have been frightening if it wasn't so pleasant. With every step, he felt he was leaving something behind. As they moved through broad corridors, Jack felt a heaviness above him. He could sense great stone arches beyond the light, groaning under the weight of the helm. Every turn offered more height and distance. Every turn offered more height and distance, and the sound of their footsteps echoed on forever into the dark. One hallway they passed through was heavy with decoration. Small niches had been cut into the stone between the windows, and statues of strange creatures stared out at him, lit softly from above. They looked like plants or trees, but they had gemstone eyes and were contorted into elegant human shapes. The mysterious twilight made his reflection ghostly in the rippled glass. In another corridor, the walls disappeared into blackness as they walked out onto a wide bridge. Small flickering lanterns dotted the railing. Jack thought he heard water and looked over the side, but he couldn't see anything in the dim light. As they walked, the sound increased to a roar, and he felt mist on his face. Eventually, in the distance, he saw a great arch marking the end, and as he passed underneath, he heard silver bells and whispering. Movement danced just beyond the edges of his vision. Whenever they went by a window, moonlit view showed endless cliffs and distant blue-black mountains. It was a wild and lonely landscape, and the glass did nothing to hold it back. He wanted to explore. The helm was a beautiful place at night, but every step they took made him feel more tired. He began to wonder if they would ever arrive, or if they were just going anywhere in particular. Suddenly, Derek stopped. Oh, how interesting. Jack stepped through the door ahead and found they were back where they'd started. Oh, we just went in a circle? He asked sleepily. Not exactly. The room isn't the same as we left it. That nice chair you were sitting on is gone, anyway. Sounded a bit disappointed. Jack noticed this place also had a fireplace. So, how are we going to find my room? Derek pondered for a moment and closed the door. When he opened it again, the passage they had come through was gone, replaced by a sweeping staircase and a big set of double doors. The entrance hall. Yes, well, that's a start. He closed the door, and when he opened it again, it appeared to lead out onto a white marble balcony. Jack caught the musky smell of leaves. The next opening revealed a small solarium full of potted plants. Not quite. We want to go somewhere new, please. Jack would have thought it was all rather novel if he hadn't been so tired. Why don't you try? Derek suggested, stepping elegantly out of the way. Jack shrugged. When he opened the door, he found a rustic little whitewashed room with a canopied bed on one side and a gargoyle sink on the other. Exposed piping ran up and around the ceiling, and chipped black brickwork was showing between moth-eaten draperies. It looked aged and full of texture, like the dressing room in an old theater. A big window over the sink revealed an empty, sheltered yard. Ah, there you go. Derek clapped his hands politely. You must be very tired, yes. I don't think you would have found it that quickly otherwise. Thinking of nothing but soft blankets and sleep, Jack stumbled forward and collapsed onto the sheets. See you tomorrow, Derek whispered and closed the door with a click. Jack was already dreaming. Chapter 2. A long time ago. Two companions found themselves on a grassy hillside covered in yellowing leaves. The midday autumn sun hung low in the sky, bright and cool, throwing long shadows behind distant trees. There was a sound like shouting. behind them, but it faded quickly. "William, isn't it pretty?" Jack asked, tromping through the leaves. William inhaled deeply. The air smelled earthy and fresh, and he also caught something like cinnamon from the spicy cloud that always seemed to follow Jack. Abandoning his usual stoic demeanor, he ran up to the crest of the hill and collapsed into the roots of a lonely maple. Jack followed, laughing, and began building a nest. "I want to stay here forever, Will." Jack's eyes opened wide with earnest. "Do you think we'll get to stay here?" William looked out at the endless pastures rolling away before them. Isolated oaks and maples, red and yellow and brown, scattering their leaves into a persistent breeze. It was hard to believe in forever when the trees themselves had given up. "No, I suppose not." He sighed. Things never stay the same. When Jack's face fell, William shook his head. "Don't worry about it. We're here now, aren't we?" Reaching over the leafy pile, he ruffled Jack's hair, releasing another cloud of spice. Jack leaned out of the way automatically, his initial happiness floating away on the rippling waves of grass. William folded his hands behind his head and laid back, deciding to let the mood pass. These two had known each other a long time, and for a while they just sat there, as close friends often do, Jack rustling the leaves as he shifted. Clouds moved overhead, blotting small shadows in the distance. Wind brought the empty plains to life. William was the first to break the silence, hoping to tempt Jack's wandering mind. "There's something different about a place like this. It's like we've broken free from certainty, adrift on some current that'll carry us away from things we're supposed to remember and worry about." Jack gave him a long look. "But what are we doing here?" William could only laugh. "Now that is a question. What are we ever doing anywhere? We're here now, we'll be gone later. That's just how things work." He looked over at Jack, who was staring out into the hills with a furrowed brow, his eyes focused on something beyond sight. "It's just... You're right. Things are different. It's not this place, though. I think it's us. It felt this way for a while." William was surprised. He had never seen this side of Jack before. "Well, changes happen. We just have to live through them and hope we come out the better for it." Jack didn't respond. He began picking the bark off a twig, his fingers acting automatically. A slight breeze passed by, causing a few leaves to whirl their way down the hill and off into the distance before dissipating. Aside from a dull crackling, it was quiet. William reached across the leafy barrier and wrapped Jack in a one-arm hug. It was an awkward position, and after a moment the two fell sideways in a flurry of leaves. "Explosions of foliage!" William yelled, and dropped a pile of leaves onto Jack's face. "Hey!" He sat up sputtering. "I was serious!" "I know, and it was weird." "Well, fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." He crossed his arms. "You'll notice it soon enough." William just shrugged. "I never really notice things until it's too late. Then I just think about them endlessly." Jack tossed a stick down the hill. "I guess we're both wasting time. Maybe we should just forget it and enjoy the leaves." Forgetting it is how we got here, and it always seems to guide us forward. I guess there's really nothing better to do. Remembering to forget is the hardest part, though, isn't it? William said. Jack sighed and nodded. After taking a moment to rebuild his nest, he settled in with a satisfying crackle. It wasn't long before the troubled thoughts left his mind completely. They stayed under the maple tree for the rest of the day, talking little as the sun moved across the horizon and stained the clouds a dark orange. Nothing happened and nothing needed to. They just sat there, as close friends often do, Jack rustling the leaves as he shifted. "Are you cold, Jack?" William stirred from his trance. The color had drained from the world, and the warmth had followed swiftly. "A little." William cleared a space in the leaves and piled some sticks in a crisscrossing fashion. He then proceeded to dig in his pockets for matches. After removing a great deal of small objects, mostly bits of metal and string that Jack thought were too important to throw away, he gave a little shrug, looks like you'll have to start it." Jack began rooting around in his nest. After a moment, he surfaced with a dry brown leaf, which he crumpled over the pile of sticks. There was a small snap, and little tongues of flame appeared. Jack dusted off his hand on his sweater. "Just don't let it get too big, or those loose leaves will catch." Jack poked the fire with a stick. "I don't think we'll be here much longer, Jack." "I know. Our moment lasted a long time, though. I think we made the most of it." "Indeed, we did. Indeed, indeed." Jack pulled a face. William was glad to see him back to normal. "So, where to next?" Jack thought for a moment. "Somewhere with lots of lights." "Is that a guess, a wish, or a prediction?" "I suppose all three. But it's pretty clear it'll be night, and lights generally come on when it's dark." Jack stopped. He felt something cold land on his neck. When he turned to look, he found that the tree had become a lamppost. It was snowing, and they were now sitting on a bench just off of the sidewalk of a shop-lined street. A glow of warm light coming from nearby shop windows threw the cobblestones into sharp relief. The snow reflected ambiance onto the faces of passerbys, none of whom seemed to notice their sudden arrival. "Wow, I missed it completely," Jack said, finding it hard to keep the disappointment out of his face. "Me too, though I did notice an odd shift in the light. You don't suppose we started a wildfire on that hilltop, do you?" "No, we took it with us." Jack pointed across the street to where a few people were roasting marshmallows around a charcoal grill. They were all wearing bright red coats with maple leaves embroidered onto the sleeves. William stood up. "This looks like a fun place to explore." Jack leapt to his feet, always up for an adventure. "Where do you want to go first?" William asked. "Oh, there." Jack trotted across the road towards a small shop with assorted trinkets and clockworks in the window. William followed behind at a slower pace, looking around. The sky above was bleak and wintry, low clouds reflecting the city light, but the sheltered street was cheerful, a sparse snow drifting down noiselessly. Many people were shopping in spite of the chilly weather. He noticed he was now wearing a long black coat, and Jack had a bright red hat on. Inside the store, Jack immediately went to the window to look at the trinkets up close. There were carved figurines, brass bells, and wind-up clockwork gadgets, all highly polished or painted with bright colors. William had to suppress a laugh as Jack walked to and fro with eyes like saucers. An old woman smiled at them from the counter. "Well, just look at all this stuff," Jack said excitingly before dashing off into the back of the store without waiting for a reply. William settled into a chair next to a rotund woman doing a crossword. "Is he yours?" she asked, nodding towards Jack. "I guess you can say that." "Mine are over there." She pointed towards two children in the corner. He nodded, but didn't say anything. She went back to her crossword. William watched the children for a while, stray thoughts chasing each other around his head. The woman filled in a horizontal with a little grunt of triumph. "It's so strange," he said. "What's that?" the woman asked distractedly. "Oh, well, we were all young once, but we somehow forget what it's like to be fascinated by things." The woman grunted again. "And that's why I bring them here. A bit like voyeur happiness." William watched as she filled in 32 down with the word voyeur. "Will?" Jack was back. "Did you find what you were looking for?" William asked. "No, but the old lady found something for me. What do you think?" William took the object. It was rather small and made of brass. It looked a bit like a cigarette lighter, but it had a winding mechanism on the bottom and a loop of metal attached to the side. There was a large red button on the top, and some hidden clockwork was ticking faintly inside of it. "What is it?" William asked. "I don't know, but it was telling me secrets," Jack said. William got to his feet. "Well, let's go pay for it." Chapter 3. Jack awoke suddenly. He'd been dreaming but couldn't remember much of it. All that remained was a lingering sense of loss, like a physical ache. The name William drifted lazily across his memory, but was driven away by a pang of hunger. He got out of the bed and walked over to the sink. The small window above it seemed to be fogged up, but when he ran his hand over the glass, he realized it was frost. Curious, he undid the lock on the side and cranked it open. A wintry landscape greeted him. Tall pines draped in thick snow under a bleak gray sky. A squirrel was making its way from branch to branch, creating small white explosions and chittering wildly. Jack didn't remember seeing snow the night before, but supposed it could have fallen while he slept. After cranking the window shut, he turned on the gargoyle tap by twisting a wing and ran some water through his hair. There wasn't a towel anywhere, so he just shook his head like a dog and wiped his hands on his shirt. In the corner there was a thin door that turned out to be a closet. It had a mirror hanging inside next to a long coat, and Jack was startled by his reflection. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to look like, but the thin face and bottomless black eyes staring out at him felt entirely unfamiliar. He tried to guess his age, but it was impossible. He wasn't very old or very young, that was certain. Or maybe not. It's a bit like Derek, actually, he thought. He's even stranger, though. He wasn't sure if Derek was planning to come get him, but he decided he'd risk trying to find food on his own. Derek said there was the dining room somewhere, after all. He stepped out onto the corridor, and the door closed behind him with a snap. It was a long, tall passage, lit dimly by slit windows near the ceiling. Shivering a little, his breath rising in a mist, he opened the door again to fetch the coat he'd seen in the closet. His room had disappeared, replaced by a curving hallway. "And I'm already lost," he muttered, bemused, though he wasn't entirely surprised. He should have expected the door to change. The passage he was in didn't look promising, so he stepped into the new hallway. After moving around a colossal pillar, which he'd taken to be a wall, he realized he wasn't in a hallway at all. The door had brought him to a great domed atrium. The floor was a puzzle of inlaid marble, curling and flowering into the distance with geometric designs. Massive black stone columns polished to a glossy sheen loomed darkly around the walls, hiding small niches and secret spaces. In some far-off alcove, a pigeon murmured and flapped, making glassy echoes in the open space. High above, the ceiling curved into an immense dome. At the distant center of the room, rising from a grassy hill, an old and gnarled maple tree twisted into the air. An oculus lit the tree with dusty rays, leaving the rest of the hall in gray shadow. Twinkling light played on the walls, reflecting from a thin layer of water that covered most of the floor. The reflections moved slowly, tracing the outlines of columns and invading the deep shadows behind them. Jack walked towards the tree, his feet nudging the leaves dotting the surface of the water. As he passed, they would follow his feet, scattering when he took a step, then drifting back on the ripples like curious fish. His footsteps splashed lightly, the sound magnified in the quiet. The water was barely deep enough to cover the soles of his shoes, but each step echoed endlessly, mingling with that low sound of large enclosed spaces. He looked up, his eyes pulled towards the tree as it grew closer. The dark stones and the dome behind it melted together and moved out in an impossible distance. The wavering reflections congealed into stars, and the great oculus shone brighter, setting the tree aflame with color. He could almost hear it call out to him out of the deep quiet, the dry voice of fall in the wind. An enticing smell swept over him as the breeze played across his face. It was rich and cool, like leaf mold and black dirt, or the first frost of winter. When he made it to the base of the hill, his mind was heavy with expectation. For a moment he stood, staring as the branches wavered softly, making shadows across his face. Then he willed his legs to move. The climb seemed to take an age. At the top, he stopped again. The light was strongest here, and it was thick and sinister like a golden veil. It rippled in the air. The shadows beyond had deepened, and now the tree and the hill were the only things left. He put his hand into the light and felt something there. It was thin and sharp, and it moved through his fingers as the stars wheeled overhead. There was a bright flash, and he was pulled upward. Then stillness, quiet, and a sudden wind. He was sitting high on a hilltop, bathed in evening sun, autumn pastures rolling off into the distance. Beside him, someone was resting, half buried in a nest of leaves. Before Jack could say anything, the vision passed, and he was back in the darkened hall. A faint, metallic smell drifted by. He leapt to his feet, staring at the spot where the boy had been resting. From the back of his mind, a voice echoed, nearly audible. There's something different about a place like this. Like we've broken free from certainty, adrift on some current that'll carry us away from things we're supposed to remember and worry about. Was it his own voice or an echo at the back of his mind from some distant memory? Gripped for the first time by the strangeness of his situation, he took a deep breath in an attempt to calm his racing heart. What was this place, and why had he come here? A flood of strange memories danced through his head, each lingering long enough to tease him with understanding before fading into oblivion. The images came faster and faster, and in a moment he was lost somewhere between horror and glee. An engulfing landscape containing vast realities and half-remembered intentions. He was running, crawling, in a state of madness. The water splashed around him, and the light danced on it wildly. The walls seemed to push out as he ran towards them, the old tree calling him back. But he was suddenly at the door, clawing his way through. He closed his eyes, willing himself to be somewhere safe, and slammed the door shut, sinking to the floor. Jack, what's wrong? Jack blinked. Derek was crouched in front of him. Hi, Jack didn't know what to say. The crushing emotions had disappeared as quickly as they had come. Have a sit down. Have some food, Derek said, steering him into a chair. He found himself at a table full of everything he liked to eat. Wow, what's all of this? He asked. Without waiting for an explanation, he began piling the plate in front of him with food. Derek watched him, sitting down across from the table. Well, at least whatever happened didn't damage your appetite, yes? Jack stopped with his fork halfway to his mouth and looked up. I don't know where I was, but it was wonderful. And horrible. There was a maple tree, and it was full of memories. Derek nodded slowly. Do you know it? Jack asked. Oh, maybe? He stared at him for a moment, then turned and looked out the window, sipping at something steaming in a mug. Jack wondered again why he was at the helm, but this time it didn't feel very pressing, if there even was an answer. At least this room was comfortable and warm. A fire was talking to itself in the fireplace, and snow was drifting by the windows. Derek set his drink on the table and turned to face Jack. What did you see? He asked, his pale eyes suddenly clear. Jack felt like they were boring into him. Well, it was a big room. That's not what I meant, Derek said, his eyes boring deeper. Jack knew what he meant, but he didn't want to remember. Already he could feel it slipping away, like waking up from a bad dream. Well, he said finally, I saw lots of things, but they faded as quickly as they came. The only thing I remembered clearly was sitting by that tree. The room just sort of melted, and I was on a hillside. There was someone else there, but the whole thing was gone in an instant. Then everything became... He didn't know how to describe the feeling, but Derek seemed to understand. Memories are tricky, he told him. It's easy to lose them, and it's easy to get lost in them. The helm can be especially ruthless. He looked at Jack carefully, bunching up his mouth and moving it from side to side. Don't worry about it too much, I think. Memories aren't particularly dangerous on their own. You can't really control anything here anyway, so I suppose there isn't a lot you can do. You'll just have to expect things to behave unexpectedly. Derek pondered for a moment, then reached out and pinched the edge of the table. The whole thing rolled up on itself like a millipede, flapping loudly as it tumbled in the air before landing on the floor with a smack. Jack could only stare, his empty fork hanging in the air. See, I wasn't expecting that at all, Derek said serenely. He gave the table a shake, and it unfurled like a long carpet, keeping the breakfast setting perfectly preserved. A pitcher of orange juice defied gravity as it unwrapped itself from the folds without a splash. It's odd, though, yes? Derek said as Jack served himself a slice of pie, poking it first to make sure it was real. Why does a rolling table seem strange to someone without memories? He tapped Jack's forehead. Maybe they're still up there, and we just need to fish them out. Jack chewed thoughtfully. I don't think I want to. This place is better without memories. Derek had an odd look on his face, but didn't say anything. Don't you have any memories? How long have you been here anyway? Jack asked thickly, his mouth full. Derek rested his chin on his palms and looked out the window, his long limbs geometric. I have a few memories, yes, but even those are only half there. I've been here a long time. He moved his hand out in front of him and felt at the air. A moment later, he pulled firmly and had a small napkin in his hand. Sardonically, he passed it to Jack, who realized he had candied apple on his chin. So, are more people going to come here? Jack asked after wiping his mouth. Yes, lots more people. It's one of those times. What happens when someone leaves? I don't know. I haven't left, Derek said, rising to his feet. I want to show you something. He opened the door and motioned for Jack to follow with a long sweep of his arm. Jack looked down at his half-eaten pie and got up with some reluctance. At least he wasn't hungry anymore. The door led into a corridor with tall windows. A great deal of snow had drifted against one side, going far up over their heads. It glowed eerily with the filtered blue sunlight. The other side looked out over a cliff, and Jack could see a long snaking river far below. In the dim glare of the sun, the frozen landscape looked like hammered silver. Jack shivered. He noticed Derek was wearing a long black overcoat and wondered where he had gotten it. It made him look even thinner. Are you cold, Jack? A little. Jack was rubbing his arms unconsciously. Derek started digging in a pocket, and after a moment he withdrew a second overcoat with a long flourish and handed it to Jack. It was wonderfully warm, and Jack found a bright red stocking cap stuffed in the sleeve. They walked for a few minutes, and Jack, comfortable, awake, and well-fed, could finally enjoy the sights the home had to offer. Every hallway seemed to be full of promise, countless doors leading to any number of new wonders to discover. One room, Derek called it the aquarium, was full of little fish bowls sitting on elaborately carved shelves. It was lit by a soft light, though there was no windows, and bright, colorful fish were swimming in the water. Occasionally, one would jump into a nearby bowl with a splash. It was an amazing sight, but Jack had a hard time avoiding the fish when they leapt across the room. He was slapped in the face by a wet tail more than once. How are you avoiding them? Jack asked Derek, who had been gliding straight through without incident. Derek looked at the shelf next to him, and all the fish started swimming in synchronized circles. Oh, I'm not really sure. I'm not trying to. A fish jumped over his head gracefully and splashed Jack with an impossible amount of water on re-entry. He might have been angry, but he was completely dry once they were in the hallway again. Soon after the aquarium, Derek led him through the library. It was a huge open room with massive wooden beams across the ceiling and shelves so tall he wondered how they could stand without falling over. He wanted to stay and look at the books, but Derek was making his way towards a door at the far end. Jack made a mental note to come back when he had more time. Looking down, he noticed a few fish scales on the sleeve of his coat and brushed them off absent-mindedly. They exploded with a glittering pop, and he hurriedly snuffed out the fires they started on the rug. Now, Jack, Derek said, you shouldn't play with fire in a room full of paper. He motioned to the shelves. Maybe Derek is just a crazy old man, Jack thought to himself. Eventually he'll snap and decide to eat my kidneys. After walking face first into an invisible wall, that's called glass. You should walk around it next time. And nearly getting mauled by a tiger. That's only a painting, you know. Jack was certain Derek was taking the strangest route he could find, though how anyone could divine a specific route through a funhouse worth of trick doors and hallways was beyond him. Luckily, he didn't have to endure much more as they stopped in the next room. Well, we're here, Derek said, holding out his long arms as if to model the fabulous contents within. Jack looked around. Where is here, though? It's an interesting room, Derek said. I wanted you to walk around and see if you recognized anything. He wandered off along the shelves like a window shopper. Curiosity piqued. Jack scanned the room slowly. It wasn't very large, but it was crammed full of shelves that overflowed with bizarre objects. He picked up a few items as he passed and tried to guess their purpose. One looked like it might have been a specialized tool for setting gears. It had made an odd humming noise as he held it. Another looked like an aerial of some sort, but it had a key to wind it. And when he did, it started singing faintly. Derek, what are these things for? Jack asked. He appeared next to him. Oh, that one? He brought out the aerial with his finger. It let off a quiet, silvery chorus. What? Oh, no, I don't recognize it. I just asked what it could be used for. All these objects are so strange. I can't even guess. Me neither. I was hoping you might know. Jack started to ask a question, but Derek had drifted off again. Just tell me if you see anything recognizable. Jack watched him go. He wondered if Derek had brought him here because he'd found the room with the maple tree. Some part of him wanted to go back there and confront whatever force had made him flee. But every time he thought about it, a well of anxiety bubbled up inside of him. Lost in thought, he was scanning the shelves with detached interest when he spotted something that felt entirely out of place. A simple black box with a silver lock on it. He picked it up. It was heavy for something so small, and a dull clunk announced the presence of some chunky piece of metal inside. He looked around for a key, but didn't see anything lying nearby. Disappointed, he replaced the box on its shelf. He knew that it was important. It burned in his mind with importance. But he didn't want to ask Derek about it. Perhaps he'd keep a few secrets of his own. What's the grin for? Derek was peering at him through a gap on the shelves. Oh, nothing. Jack wandered off, thoroughly satisfied by the bemused expression on Derek's face. Alright, that is the end of chapter 3. If you want me to continue reading, I will continue reading. If you just want to see the end of this game, in the next video, I can do some rapid cuts and just show you the unlocking of each pillar, and we'll call it a day. But yeah, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for keeping me company. You guys have no idea how much I appreciate every single one of you. Yeah, I'll be back with something very soon, I promise.